I recently told you about that abandoned town in Nevada. I thought I had shared all that I could emotionally bear. However, as the years have passed, I will never be able to shake the unsettling memory. I did my job as a ranger, always warning folks away from the abandoned town, always reminding them of the story I lived through. I did as they told me. I stayed away from the town and I kept my mouth shut. Except to those who were too stubborn, too curious for their own good, those souls who insisted on heading toward the town. It was probably about a year later that a young ranger joined our ranks. His name was Cooper. Bright-eyed, eager to do his part, he reminded me of myself when I was young, back when my world was black and white and void of the chilling shades of gray I was now too familiar with. I warned him about the town, told him the story I'd lived through, but like me, he had the same rebellious streak. A fire in his eyes lit up at the mention of the town, the same spark I used to have. Weeks passed. I noticed that Cooper was taking the same route I had once used as an excuse to drive by the town. A sinking feeling of familiarity gnawed at me. I tried to talk him out of it, but the young ranger was resolute. One evening, Cooper didn't report back. Hours turned into a full night, then morning came, and there was no sign of him. The rest of the rangers didn't seem too concerned, using his adventurous nature as an excuse for his absence. Against my better judgment and the implicit threat of my colleagues, I decided to look for him. I drove to the abandoned town, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached, I spotted his ranger vehicle, abandoned near the edge of the town. I swallowed hard, an eerie sense of déjà vu creeping over me. I found Cooper in the old mining town, battered and bruised, half-conscious, surrounded by a group of things. I couldn't find a proper word for them. Grotesque, malformed shadows that seemed more of this world than they should have been. I fought them off with all the strength I could muster, driven by fear and determination. It was either them or us. In the end, we managed to escape, leaving behind the abominable figures in that forsaken town. I drove Cooper back to the ranger station. Our co-workers were waiting. Their grim faces told me everything I needed to know. They were all very aware of the horrors dwelling in the town. Cooper was barely holding on to consciousness as I lifted him out of the vehicle. "Take care of him," I ordered, knowing the risks. "Are we going to?" Cooper started to ask, but I cut him off. "No police, nothing happened," I said, repeating the haunting words from years past. That night I drove home with an unsettling feeling. The situation was far worse than I had imagined. I had always thought that it was a one-time occurrence, an anomaly, but on this day I realized what had happened to me in that very same location was unfortunately not an isolated incident. Now it wasn't just about keeping people away from the town, but also from the unspeakable truth that lived there. And I was trapped in this cycle, haunted by the lives that had been lost and frightened for those who would also inevitably disappear in the shadow of that forsaken town. Nowadays, when I tell the story to deter the curious from the town, I include Cooper. It adds another layer of dread, another warning to the tale. But no matter what, there are always those who don't listen. I could feel the gravity of the situation pressing heavily upon me. That night I barely slept a wink, my thoughts racing and tangled. I was a ranger. I was supposed to protect people from the dangers of the wilderness, not shield them from unexplainable horrors that lurked in forgotten corners of our jurisdiction. The next morning, I decided to pay a visit to the ranger station, ignoring the sick feeling that curled in my stomach. Cooper was already there, his bruises dark against his pale skin. He seemed different, haunted, but then again, so was I. "What happened out there?" he asked me. I saw in his eyes the same horror and confusion I'd felt years ago. I sighed, leaning against the wall of the station. I wished I could give him a concrete answer, a logical explanation, but I had nothing. "I wish I knew, Cooper." The unspoken understanding passed between us then. There was no explanation, no reason or rhyme, just danger, unspeakable, inexplicable danger, and the need to keep it hidden. Days turned into weeks, then months. Cooper recovered, but there was a hardness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The same hardness I knew reflected in my own. He took up the mantle with me, warning visitors away from the town, sharing our tale when words and signs weren't enough. And together we held our secret, the silent guardians of a ghost town and its unearthly inhabitants. I thought it would continue this way, the two of us holding the fort, protecting the unsuspecting from the danger we knew but could never fully understand. But the world has a strange way of challenging your expectations. One foggy morning, a government vehicle pulled up to the ranger station. A man in a crisp suit stepped out, the kind of man you could tell was used to being listened to. He introduced himself as Agent Smith from an agency he wouldn't name, asking questions with a thinly veiled sense of authority. He'd heard rumors, he said, stories about the old mining town, about the people who'd ventured too close and never returned. He wanted to investigate, to validate these claims. Cooper and I exchanged a glance. We knew the consequences if the secret were to be uncovered, the terror it would unleash, but we also knew that we couldn't keep it hidden forever. Smith must have seen the worry in our faces. He reassured us, told us it was his job to handle things like this, that there were protocols in place for such situations. But his words did little to quell our fear. As he drove away towards the cursed town, we couldn't help but feel a sense of impending doom. Would he stir the nest? Would he bring more people? Draw attention to the place we had spent so long trying to hide? Only time would tell. And as we watched the dust cloud trailing behind his vehicle disappear into the distance, we braced ourselves for whatever was coming next. After Smith's departure, a sense of unease hung in the air. Cooper and I went back to our duties, the worries gnawing at our minds. Every sound made us jump. Every passing car gave us pause. We could only wait and wonder what Smith's investigation might find. 2 days later, Smith's vehicle reappeared, driving up the dirt road to the ranger station with an urgency that set my heart pounding. He stepped out of his car, his suit now dust-covered and his face pale. He locked eyes with me, a flicker of something I recognized in his gaze. Fear, understanding, shock. It mirrored my own expression from the day I'd encountered the unspeakable in that abandoned town. I saw them, he managed to say before collapsing to his knees. Cooper and I rushed to his side. He was shaking, his breaths coming out in ragged gasps. We helped him into the station, offering him a glass of water as he tried to compose himself. After a few minutes, Smith began to speak, recounting his experience in the town. His description of the grotesque figures matched our own experiences all too well. "There will be a team," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "They'll come. They'll contain it. It's our job. But until they do..." The implication hung heavily in the air. We were still the first line of defense, and now there was no going back to ignorance. The secret was out, at least to some extent. All we could do now was continue our work and hope that Smith's unnamed agency could provide a solution. Days turned into weeks, the waiting growing increasingly tense. Finally, one morning, a convoy of black SUVs arrived at the ranger station. Men and women, grim-faced and silent, dressed in military-style uniforms, stepped out. Smith introduced us. He explained they were a specialized government unit, dealing with unexplained phenomena. Their purpose to study, contain, and if necessary, neutralize such threats. With their arrival, our role shifted. We became guides, leading the unit to the outskirts of the forsaken town, outlining our experiences, helping them understand the horror that resided there. Life took on a surreal quality as we watched the unit set up a perimeter around the town, implementing advanced technology, the likes of which I had never seen. We were caught in a bizarre balance, straddling our roles as park rangers and the reality of the paranormal. I remember looking over at Cooper on one of those days, our gazes meeting amidst the chaos. A silent understanding passed between us. We had made it this far. There was no turning back now. In the ensuing weeks, the government unit became a permanent fixture around the ghost town. The Rangers and I got used to the hum of their machinery, the distant chatter of their personnel over walkie-talkies, the odd hours they kept. It was as if we were living in the shadow of a strange makeshift military base. Then, without warning, the unit began to recede. First, they started packing up their gear. Then they began to dismantle the provisional structures they'd set up. Within a matter of days, their presence dwindled to a skeleton crew, maintaining a watchful eye over the town but otherwise keeping a low profile. The sudden change surprised Cooper and me. Was the situation now under control? Had the threat been neutralized? When we sought answers, we were met with a wall of polite but firm deflections. "They're doing their job," Smith would say, not meeting our eyes. "Just as you're doing yours." The days grew longer and the Nevada sun harsher. The ghost town seemed to shimmer in the heat, as if it was a mirage. But it was all too real. The fear, the uncertainty, the haunting memories. Still, we carried on, taking each day as it came, hoping for the best. One evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the desert, Cooper came to me. His face was grim, his eyes shadowed. "They're leaving," he said, his voice low. "All of them." I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. Are they saying it's over?" Cooper shook his head. "No, it's not over. They're saying it's contained, whatever that means." The next day, the convoy of black SUVs drove away, leaving behind nothing but tire tracks and unanswered questions. We watched as they disappeared into the horizon, taking with them our fleeting sense of security. From that day forward, it was just us again. The park rangers of Nevada, standing guard over a town that wasn't quite right. The townsfolk may have retreated, the visitors stopped coming, even the government had stepped back. But we remained. Our job wasn't done. The ghost town remained off limits, its spectral residents a part of our silent pact with the land. And so, life moved on. The strange interlude with Agent Smith and his team felt almost like a dream, a surreal memory in the backdrop of our everyday reality. The Nevada sun blazed overhead day after day. The coyotes sang their lonesome songs at night, and we did our job as park rangers, our silent vigil over the ghost town a constant undercurrent. However, the departure of the government team did not mean an end to the oddities around the abandoned mining town. It was as though the place had a life of its own, a strange heartbeat that resonated through the desert landscape. There were nights when the desert wind carried inexplicable sounds, whispers of hushed conversations, or laughter that sent chills down our spines. There were times when the temperature around the town would suddenly drop, a chilling cold enveloping the area in the midst of a scorching summer day. We would find animal tracks leading towards the town that simply disappeared halfway, as though the creatures had vanished into thin air. Cooper and I kept a logbook of these incidents, a record of the ghost town's eerie activities. It became a ritual of sorts, our own way of trying to make sense of the absurdity that was a part of our lives. And while it was chilling, it also brought us closer together, creating a camaraderie that was born out of shared experiences and understanding. One day, as we were recording an entry about a sudden dense fog that had rolled over the town despite the clear weather elsewhere, Cooper looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder if we're making any difference at all?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the ghost town in the distance. I paused, considering his words. We might not be able to explain what's happening there or stop it, but we can protect people from stumbling into it. That has to count for something. He nodded, and we fell into a comfortable silence, the weight of our responsibility a shared burden. We resumed our duties with a shared understanding of the significance of our roles. As we went about our days, each morning brought new peculiarities, more unexplainable happenings from the ghost town. It was during one of these seemingly ordinary days that something extraordinary occurred. We were out on a routine patrol when we noticed an unusual figure standing on the edge of the town. It was a man, tall and stooped, his clothes tattered and aged, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Cooper and I exchanged a glance. We hadn't seen anyone approach the town in weeks, and we definitely hadn't noticed this man before. He stood still, staring into the town, seemingly lost in thought. Cautiously, we approached him. "Sir," Cooper called out as we got closer, "this area is off limits." The man turned to us, revealing a face weathered with age, his eyes filled with an indescribable sadness. "I know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I just came to say goodbye." Something in his voice made us pause. There was an air of sincerity, of finality in his tone. We exchanged another look before I asked the question burning in my mind. "Goodbye to who, sir?" He sighed, turning his gaze back to the ghost town. "To them," he replied, "the spirits who still linger here. I used to live here many, many years ago, and now it's my time to join them." The gravity of his words weighed heavily upon us. The mystery of the ghost town had always been an enigma, an unsolvable puzzle that we learned to live with. But as we stood there with the old man, a former resident of the town, the reality of our situation became all too clear. We spent the rest of the day with him, listening to his stories about the town, its residents, and their tragic fate. He spoke of a time when the town was lively and thriving, a stark contrast to the empty, ghostly remains that now stood. As dusk fell, he thanked us for our time and walked away, disappearing into the desert as mysteriously as he had arrived. His visit left us with a greater understanding of our charge and a renewed sense of duty. The town wasn't just a haunted spot in the middle of the desert. It was a monument to the lives that were lost, and we were its custodians. In the days that followed, the ghost town seemed to grow even more silent, its spectral residents perhaps finally at peace. Yet our vigil continued. We remained as the sentinels, the guardians, the chroniclers. Though the enigma of the town persisted, our roles evolved. We were no longer mere spectators, but integral parts of the unfolding saga.
That's all for now. Please leave us a comment and tell us what you think. Please also like and subscribe. Thank you.